Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar from MBS, powered by Habexo. The topic today is delivering sustainable outcomes. My name's Lee Jones, and I'm the head of sustainability at Habexo. My role is effectively making sure that the company operates in sustainable manners and making sure that we obviously comply with relevant laws, but also in assisting the development of sustainable outcome functionality within the platforms. So that's what I'm going to be talking to you about today. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. Everybody's microphones are muted. However, if you do have any questions or there's anything that you're unsure of, please drop questions into the Q&A function and we will respond to those after the webinar directly to yourselves. Okay, so without further ado, I'll get going. So Habexo, we are an international construction technology business. We operate in 24 countries globally, and the brands that you'll be familiar with within the UK include MBS, the host of this webinar, and also Glenigan and the Construction Information Service. From a sustainability point of view, within our vision and mission, we want to connect the world of construction to help them build more sustainably. So it's right at the core of what the business does internationally, and the UKI group and the MBS products in particular are no different in terms of that. Just a quick recap on the MBS platforms themselves. Effectively, we look after both sides of the fence. We have specification tools which are used by thousands upon thousands of different specifiers, from architects to contractors, even to local councils and different organisations, engineering consultancies, etc., to actually write specifications in an efficient manner that is then used as contractual documents to actually build a project. On the other side, we support construction product manufacturers and suppliers in listing their product information, but also getting those into the specification. I'm going to go into some demonstrations of the platform itself later on in the webinar. So if you do have any questions on those now, maybe hang tight till I've got through to that. But if there's anything that you're unclear of, or perhaps you want to know more, please drop us a note and somebody from the team will be more than happy to get back to you to give you an overview. So just a bit of background. This webinar is obviously on sustainable outcomes, and by far the largest focus at the moment is tackling climate change. I'll give you a bit of a pre-warning. This does have some references to Christmas. I know it might be a little bit early when this is aired for some people's taste, but bear with me, it will all make sense towards the end. So, the traditional Christmas card. Whether you celebrate Christmas or whether you don't celebrate Christmas, no doubt you will have at least seen one of these, if not have received one. Traditionally, they will have some form of snowy scene on it. It's the thing that when we think about the holiday period and Christmas in particular, it conjures up these images of a snowy festive season. Usually with the cards themselves, it will have some sort of romantic vision of days gone by, notably the Victorian periods, with deep snow and sort of crisp, clean landscapes. This particular one that we've got is showing some travellers that have clearly got stuck in a drift from probably quite a rapid snowfall that's caught them out, and they're trying to get out of that. Now, there's a reason why these things are sort of associated with Christmas, and why going back to the Victorian period and the artwork and the imagery on this is typically done. The reason for that is back then, temperatures were much cooler, and then through the winter periods, there was a higher risk of these sort of deep and heavy snowfalls. So if we look at 1850 on this map, this is actually come from NASA itself, and it's accumulated from different measurement functions of temperature, and you can see there's quite a lot of consistency there. So if we look at the different lines on the graph, they're all following a similar format, which shows that there's no inconsistency between the different measurements. So 1850, the temperature was here, base level, sort of around 0 degrees. But today, when we look at this, we've actually increased the temperature of the planet by over 1.2 degrees. Now, we're very much on target to hit that 1.3 degrees by the end of the decade. The Paris Agreement that was signed by most of the regional leaders around the globe was to try and limit climate change by 1.5 degrees by 2050. We've now sort of surpassed the metrics and the thresholds of where we should have been, and we're very much on course for disaster. There's reasons for that. Obviously, the dependency on fossil fuel is the main thing, and I'll get onto how that works in a little moment. But ultimately, from that industrial period, the Industrial Revolution, we started to burn more and more fossil fuels, notably coal, then gas and oil. The invention of the car, aeroplanes, etc., then started to ramp that up, as we can see after the war. And then when we get to the sort of the 1970s, commercial air flights and global shipping, etc., started to also then rapidly ramp up. It's when most people would have started to have holidays abroad instead of holidaying in their local countries. And we became more and more dependent. More households started to own a car. So we get to the sort of 90s, early 2000s, where 2 cars per household would become more common. Notably, around that period as well, the invention of the internet and the vast commercialization of that in terms of businesses using it to become truly global. Businesses at that particular point could then distribute products internationally. They could deal with customers that they hadn't actually been dealing with previously, before the sort of onboarding of the internet, and that just ramped things up. So it's not so much the increase, but the rapid nature of that increase that we've got to focus on here. You can see that it's pretty level till we get to where we started to widely burn those fuels, and then it's just growing and growing and growing. So if we drew that trajectory, it will get steeper and steeper on that curve. We will have all witnessed the extreme weather events in the news that have been happening of late, not just sort of attributed to far corners of the world anymore. These are happening on your own doorstep, whether it's extreme flooding, wildfires, and then obviously the disaster, the destruction, and ultimately the fatalities that come as a result of that, are something that we need to try and limit and adapt to. Carbon emissions themselves, then, are a natural occurring thing. Carbon is there in the atmosphere. The sun will radiate heat to the earth that comes through the atmosphere. And the carbon dioxide that's then present will actually reflect some of that back into space, which we can see by this line here. But some of it's reflected back from the carbon dioxide, and it's actually absorbed by the earth. And that's what kept that constant temperature. However, through burning fossil fuels, we then start to emit more and more carbon dioxide. Now, going back to pre-industrial times, it was around 200 parts per million. We're now well in excess of 400 parts per million in the atmosphere. Adding that additional carbon dioxide limits the amount that can be reflected back into space. So by default, we then reflect more back to the Earth, and ultimately the Earth increases in temperature. And it's that that's causing these extreme weather events. So we need to do more. But in particular for construction, we've got a really big job to do. Now, there are some skeptics out there, and some have rationale behind what they're doing. Some might just be listening to misinformation that's being spread on the internet, etc. But if we look at the traditional press, you can see going back sort of 10, 20 years ago, the messages that were being relayed about things being a climate scan or we're being brainwashed, etc., etc. Whereas today, there's no escaping it. The amount of destruction and the disasters and the fatalities that are happening as a result of these extreme weather events can't be ignored. So it's widely accepted. Climate change is real, and we need to do more to change it. If only we'd listened a little bit earlier, though. We've actually got a news cutting here, and this has been tested. That you can actually Google this particular news article here. It's from 1912. The same year the Titanic sank, so it's well over 100 years ago, where scientists actually noted that burning coal was actually impacting the climate. So we've known about this for a while, but in true fashion, we're a reactive species. We're now at the point where we've got to react to something instead of preventing it. Construction itself, then, where that sits, responsibly, the built environment is 39% of all global carbon emissions. Now, you can see on the graph there, this comes from a variety of sources, so the IPCC report, the Green Building Council, in different regions and so forth. But 28% of that is energy use in buildings, so that's the buildings being used. Me sitting now with the electricity on and connected to the internet talking to you, and vice versa, you sitting there with the heating on listening to it, and so forth. The other 11% then sits within construction. So we're constantly building. We need to build more. The population's rapidly increasing. And ultimately, we need to do this. We need to lower the energy demand of existing stock, but we also need to reduce the carbon emissions associated with new builds as well. So, how do specifiers see this? Well, um, if you do a bit of research, or if you are a specifier yourself and you're a member of an organisation such as the Royal Institute of British Architects, a lot of architectural practitioners that will be listening will be chartered practices. The RIBA have actually got their Sustainable Outcomes Guide. And what they've done is they've aligned their own sustainable outcomes specific to construction to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, but notably the ones that are actually pertinent to construction. They're not the only organisation that are doing this, but with the long-standing relationship with the RIBA and the governance that they have over the architecture profession within the UK, it's the reason why we've mentioned this one. So there's a lot that you can do to research. If you're a supplier, you should really be aligning your ethos and your products to these types of things as well. So MBS do a lot of research. We earlier this year published our fourth Sustainable Futures report. We've done these over the past 15 years. The first couple had about a 5-year gap between them, but we've now started to do that on a sort of every 2-year basis. The reason being is obviously the topics become more pressing, but we want to assess and look back and see how the industry is changing, adapting, and ultimately improving on these different things. Now, aligning to those RIBA sustainable outcomes, we asked the respondents to the survey this year to actually rank them in the order of importance that they saw. So there's 8 sustainable outcomes in the RIBA guide, and we have the ranking there. Now, it was no surprise that the top 3 were what they were. There was net zero operational carbon, good health and well-being, and sustainable land use and biodiversity. Now, net zero operational carbon, so the carbon emissions that are a result of the building being used from the energy being used within that building, is actually governed by things like Part L of the building regulations, which stipulates the amount of energy demand that buildings can have and so forth. Good health and well-being goes without saying. There's a myriad of different regulations that we have to comply with to ensure that buildings are safe for people to use, whether that's fire safety or whether that's through volatile organic compounds that might cause health impacts to people. It's a big focus. So there's a lot that can be covered there. We do have a lot of other webinars that discuss these topics. So if you visit the mbs.com, you can maybe go back and have a look. But then sustainable land use and biodiversity was third. This wasn't a surprise again. At the beginning of this year, the government introduced the biodiversity net gain law. So sites now have got to leave with 10% more biodiversity than when they first started if it's a fresh site build. That obviously places a lot more focus on things like refurbishments, etc. But as you know, with things particularly around housing, it will be fresh plots of land that are then being dug up, and the biodiversity in those regions will be disturbed. So they've now got to leave this with improved measures than when the site begins. But then what was maybe a surprise to some, but not to others, was the fourth place, net zero embodied carbon. There's no regulation in the UK for this at the moment. There's a lot of work going on, and a lot of organisations are starting to focus on this. But ultimately, making sure that the carbon that's associated to the actual construction of the building and all of those construction products and materials that go into it are being monitored and measured and reduced, ultimately, is just currently doing the right thing for now at the moment. That's not always going to be the case, but that's where we are. So in terms of changes, the European Union, and yes, the UK is not part of that anymore, but we tend to follow suit with a lot of these things, is mandating carbon metrics for all buildings by 2030. So embodied carbon, operational carbon, we've got to start providing these measurements. As an international business, it's something that Avexo will be following. And just coincidentally, we had an office rebuild done quite recently, and this was based in Sweden, and we had to actually submit these reports. The Swedish government have already taken this on board. So countries are starting to get used to it. So that's the BOVACAT regulation in Sweden. But then if we look at what's happening in the UK, whole life carbon assessments within the London Plan Guidance have started to come on board. So you've got to have these carbon metrics for certain projects within London. That's outlined there. So people are starting to comply. We've just recently seen the UK Net Zero Carbon Building Standard launched. If you've not taken a look at this yet, I really, really would recommend it. There's some fantastic webinars online on the UK Net Zero Building Carbon Standard, but also take a look at the document as well. It very, very clearly demonstrates what needs to be done to measure and reduce at every single stage of the projects, but also UK specific. So it relates very well to what you're doing. And then ultimately, there's been a lot of talk of this, and it keeps getting picked up and dropped in government. The pandemic shelved it at one point, and then the change of government has obviously caused slight delays to it since. But Part Z of the building regulations, whilst we've got these industry standards that are organisational led, it's not actually mandated in terms of the government say this has to be done for everything. And that's where something like a regulation on carbon assessments will come in. Part Z, you can Google this and you can download the document and take a look. It's been there in draft for a while, but as mentioned, it's probably some years off being implemented, but it does need to come. So how does that leave construction projects? Now, sticking with the sort of festive period theme, they can be compared a little bit to the gym in the new year. So I've very, very rarely sort of taken this into consideration. I've never really stepped foot in a gym, I don't think, in my life, but I do have a lot of family, friends that really, really enjoy going to these places and doing a workout. But the commonality with them is come January, everybody starts moaning that New Year's resolutions have caused it to be packed. There's loads of people in there that wouldn't normally be there. They can't get on the equipment and so forth. But then come February, it stops. The moaning stops and the gym's quiet again and all the regulars are happy. Construction projects sort of follow a similar suit. Most start with the best of intentions, but those that actually follow these through and achieve them at the end are in the few. Now, in the same Sustainable Futures report, which you can download at the mbs.com, we asked the respondents on how many times their projects have sustainability targets, how many times they're achieved, and so forth. Now, if we break that down into the actual simplest form, 8 out of 10 projects had sustainability targets, but the realization was that only 2 of them achieved them in full. It's not to say that the other 6 out of 10 just don't achieve anything. They just don't achieve what they set out to at the beginning. So it starts to weaken and water down throughout the project timeline. And that's the thing that we need to address. We need better planning up front. And we need to make sure that we're pushing and these deliverables are actually being achieved through each stage. And that's where the mandates will come in terms of law enforcement and regulation. Hopefully that will get more stringent. But as an industry, we are a good bunch of people. We're very professional in what we do in the different professions that we have, and we can do more now. We know what we need to do. We just need to get on with it. But that said, there will always be barriers. So in the same report, we asked what the main barriers were to sustainability. Now, the cost came out on top. It's perceived that sustainability is additional costs, and that may be true in most cases. However, the likelihood is that if it's planned in as early as possible, so the conceptual stages and in the brief, instead of being left to the design and engineering functions, that the sustainable outcomes will, 1, be more achievable, but 2, they'll be more cost effective to do as well because it would have been planned in from the start. Lack of client demand is another one. If they are perceiving this to be cost effective or uncost effective even, and they're not being forced to do it by regulation, then chances are to return better profits, they're not going to go down that route. But then there was other things such as products being value engineered out. Obviously, construction projects are usually at very, very small margins. And people will have professionals that will sit there and go through and try to swap and change things to get the best deal and ultimately the most profit at the end. It's not great for sustainability in that sense. I think that's where the specification can come in. Prescriptive specifications, obviously being a contractual document, and particularly stipulating the performance criteria around sustainability, or even going one step further and specifying a specific manufacturer's product, can actually help to reduce the impact of that. But that said, on the cost barrier, if we look at the sort of rental market of offices across the world at the moment, Um, Investors are very, very quickly starting to understand that they can actually get more money back on return through these developments. Now, in London, typically, that we can see there from these statistics, this came from the JLL research, 11.6% increased premiums on rental for green certified office stock. That will be low energy demand. It'll be stuff that maybe had low embodied carbon in it, or higher well-being factors and so forth. But usually it will be the energy demand bit. Now, the reason for this, if we look at the EPC ratings on the graph underneath, so the one with the lime green bar charts, typically a high performing building will be A, B. Now, if we look at a typical home, just to keep it nice and simple, obviously commercial developments get quite complex, but this will explain it in a lot more simple manner. Around £1,000 a year for a EPC rated A or B house, typical house. Commonly though, most buildings in the UK, particularly with the existing building stock, are lower EPC rating D. So that is around here. It's sort of the £1,500 a year to £2,000 a year energy bill mark, which is obviously twice as much. So if you can say when you're renting this out that, look, we're going to reduce your in-use fees by this because the energy's not going to be there in terms of what you need to use, you could actually charge slightly more for the rent, and it claws it back. Now, on that, there is a demand at the moment through this same research of almost 4 million square metres of sustainable developments required around Europe. At the moment, there's only 1.7 million square metres available, which leaves well over 50% deficit there. So we are starting to see, particularly the office sector, increase and see these sustainable outcomes being pushed. That will lead to other development types then being the same and starting to follow suit. But ultimately, we are heading in the right path. We just need to do it faster. In terms of specification and manufacturers themselves, the report demonstrated that well over 9 out of 10 agreed that a robust specification is important to achieving sustainable outcomes. I mentioned that previously about the prescriptive specifications, notably making sure that those performance requirements are in there, but then ultimately going one step further, specifying specific manufacturers' products, particularly if they've got a minimal embodied carbon figure or a low U value if you're looking at the building fabric, etc., to making sure that if products are then substituted, it's either difficult to do or products have to be like for like in terms of those sustainability performance criteria. It will make sure that the design intent that you had for the building is then followed through to construction. It will perform as it was intended in the in-use phase. But on the flip side, again, 9 out of 10 specifiers agree that more manufacturers need to provide sustainability information about the products. So we went one step further and asked both sides of the fence on what they see as the most important pieces of information that they either provide as a supplier or the most important ones that are needed by the specifiers. And you can see on the screen there was very much a disconnect. Now, if we disregard the first one by the users of information, i.e. thermal performance data, this might be just a miscarry of information. The suppliers may have seen this as just, this is performance data, not sustainability data, hence why it's not listed at all within that top 5 there. However, if that one is omitted, embodied carbon would then be ranked at the top by the users. Now, that does not feature in the suppliers list at all. It's not to say that suppliers aren't providing embodied carbon figures, but those that are very much in the few at the moment. So that's a bit of a backstory on why climate change is doing what it's doing and what we need to address it as a sector, whether you are a specifier or a manufacturer. I'd like to now show you what the MBS ecosystem can do to actually help you to achieve those goals. So we're now in MBS Source. This is the MBS product platform where you can search for thousands upon thousands of construction products, literature, CPD materials, even digital assets such as BIM objects, CAD files, and so forth. We've got on the homepage here, so if you just visit source.thembs.com, it's free to access for the users and the manufacturers. If you want to look at getting listed on this, please just drop us a note and we'll speak to you. You can filter by a lot of different things and look at the featured products there, but what I'm going to do, because of the time constraints that we have, is Let's look for a certain product. Say we were developing the building envelope on a particular project. We might want, I don't know, mineral wool slab insulation. You can see that source then brings back a load of options based on the intelligence that's in the background on what I'm typing. And I'm just going to pick this one. It will then bring in a load of options. So we've got 69 different suppliers of mineral wool slab insulation. What we then have in here is the ability to then filter. So if we want to see only manufacturers that are providing products that have sustainability data allocated to them, we can do this. Just a caveat, those that provide sustainability data, we class this as products that meet at least 4 of the properties that we ask the suppliers to complete, and or have an EPD certificate available. If there is an EPD, usually most things can be filled in anyway. They seem to be the holy grail of sustainability information for construction products. It contains everything that goes into it, as well as the carbon measurements as well, which I'll get on in a moment. But we can hit that filter, and then straight away you can see that we've now reduced that 69 down to 32. If I just pick on one randomly here, we'll then see how that information is structured. So as a specifier, this is going to make your job a hell of a lot easier because, one, it's structured. If you go from manufacturer to manufacturer on different web pages, different product data sheets and so forth, the information is going to be in different structures, it's going to be in different formats, contain different levels of information, whereas we've got that consistency going through here with MBS source. So straight away you can see that the third-party certification that this manufacturer has, it's very impressive. They've got everything from ISO 14001 operational level to EPDs for the product level stuff, and then other things such as UKCA marking, BBA, CE, and so forth. If we then scroll through into the product itself, typical information that you would expect, such as application, the description, but then we get into the specification information. So we go down to general, we've got some of the filter functionalities that you can see there, the classification type, but then within the spec, all of that information regarding the performance requirements from a sustainable point of view are actually contained within this. So what regulations it complies with, down to the thermal conductivity of this particular product. Likewise, if this was a hand dryer, for example, or an electrical appliance of any description, you might want to know how many kilowatt hours of energy demand it has. That would be listed within there as well. But this is a piece of insulation. The U value is going to be the big thing that we're focusing on, and you can see that that's then listed there. Recycled content. This could be up to 84%. The R values of these things, and then the typical width. Now, if we start to change the information that's listed within here, that information then changes in the background as well, and we can start to see the different varying U values, etc. But flicking through to the sustainability information, we ask for a number of different things. So, does your product contain any red list materials? This is a simple answer for the manufacturers, yes or no. Red lists being those volatile organic compounds that are harmful or hazardous to respiratory systems or skin, and are generally just the well-being of people. The country of material origin and the country of product manufacture. Now, the reason we ask for both of those is you may be manufacturing a product, say, in Manchester, but if the material is being imported from Czechoslovakia, there's carbon emissions associated to the transportation there that's within that. Then into the material itself, so what goes into this, we will know that certain products, certain materials will have higher embodied carbon figures, for example, than others, or be more energy intensive in the production. If we look at decking, for example, you might have aluminium decking versus timber decking. It's quite obvious which is going to have the lowest embodied carbon figures, which are more recyclable, for example, in terms of the aluminium, for in that being the case. But there's lots that we can do. And then we have the manufacturing plant. The manufacturing plant is very important in terms of the address. So if you're looking at life cycle analysis and you want to be calculating those A4 to A5 stages, so the delivery to site and the construction, knowing the manufacturing location, so that's where that product's being delivered from and to, is quite important with that. But then we have the embodied carbon as well. So the A1 to A3 stage is defined by EM 15804. Globally, this is the accepted standard for measuring life cycle carbon emissions on products or projects, as well as through these stages. So embodied carbon, or upfront carbon as it's sometimes referred to, is listed within there. We then have the recycled content, which you can quite see here, and that's referenced to the 14021. Manufacturers were asking to declare that. And then the expected life. Obviously, embodied carbon figures, etc., are one thing, but if a product is going to last a lifetime versus 5 years, it obviously impacts that whole life carbon figure as well. So we're doing that. And then the third-party certificates. If you want to go and download that EPD, you can. We can click this here. So if we want to then take a look at some other products, I mean, let's look at carpet. So pile carpet tiles. Let's look at pile carpet tiles here. We've got 333 different products that you can see. With then filters available, then if we just ignore the one for now, look at the filters that we have under sustainability data. So looking at that more granularly, we could filter by recycled content or embodied carbon. Now, if I load this down to, I don't know, say I wanted something really low, 8.5 kilograms CO2 per meter squared. It then brings back the products that don't meet that criteria. Now, we've got sponsored functionality there. If you want to know more about getting your products listed towards the top of the page, please just drop us a note and let us know. But looking at this, we've got some products here. We've got one by Milken. I'm just going to click compare and I'll show you how this works. One by Bermatex and one by Target. And I'm just going to click compare. And what this will do is actually bring in those three products side by side. We can then go and actually compare that information. So if we see we're now in this specification data, all of that is listed. And then right down to the sustainability information, you can see that we've got these embodied carbon figures. So straight away we can see that actually, yeah, this one's produced in the Netherlands. These two are produced in the United Kingdom. So if your site is in the UK, they're going to be closer to for the delivery, and then what the embodied carbon figures in with each. So we know that this one here is the lowest per meter squared. There are other factors that we might want to look at, but just as a very quick overview, that is how the comparison function works. So for manufacturers themselves, how we facilitate that is in the back end, you would have access to something that we call the partner platform. And this is where all the products are authored within MBS Source. So you can see here that we've just got some test examples. I'm just going to click on this. Obviously, I don't want to be contravening any GDPR laws and showing you the competitors' products and so forth. So this is a dummy one, just for all intents and purposes of this webinar. So if we click on sustainability, in that back end there, you can actually see that you can upload your EPD certificates. If you want to add any data in, you can start to do this, whether it contains red list materials, material origin, the location of your plant, the embodied carbon figures, and so forth. Now, as those are filled in, this completeness indicator here will start to increase to give you that good indication of where you would stand. As you can see here, the sustainability section is incomplete at the moment, but it's very, very user-friendly, and it will allow you to actually understand what you're doing there. One of the other things that we can then do within MBS Source is we could look for certification. Now, this might be BBA, for example, the British Board of Agreement certificates, or it might be something that we're looking at improving the well-being from a sustainability point of view, and we might want quiet appliances or highly insulated materials and so forth to keep volumes down to a minimum. Something through the pandemic, we all noticed that really how noisy were our houses when we were doing there. So Quiet Mark is a certification scheme that covers that. So as a third-party certification provider, you can actually host, and we have a lot of them that do on here, but under their own banners, you can actually go and search by products that are certified against them schemes. So if you were looking for, I don't know, a piece of insulation that was BBA certified, or if you were looking for air handling unit that had quiet mark certification to keep the noise down to a minimum. They're all listed within here. So as a manufacturer, if you have third-party certification, please get it uploaded, and we can make sure these links are there. But if you're a specifier yourself, please take a look at those. You can check a whole host of different things and look at products that actually meet certain schemes. So if you've got sustainable outcomes in mind at the beginning of your design phase, and you think, actually, yeah, we want to achieve these minimum volumes, or we want to achieve minimum U values, you can then start to go and look at some of the different certification schemes that we've got within there, and making it easy for you, just view the products that actually hosted against those. I think the next thing to move on to would be CPD. Obviously, specifiers as professionals will all pretty much take CPD, especially if you're an architect and a chartered one in particular. You will have to do your 35 hours a year to achieve a minimum of 100 points to retain that chartered status. And MBS actually facilitate REBA CPD on behalf of the RIBA. So if we look into this very quickly, this has just been launched, brand new website. We actually launched it at an event in London just a few weeks ago, but it's fresh. It's a very, very easy to use website. It's been very, very well accepted. But from a sustainability point of view, you can view the REBA core curriculum within here. Now, if you are a manufacturer looking to provide CPD, you can actually start to get different topics, CPD topics within there. But obviously, if you're a user of CPD material, you can actually come and filter. So if we go into sustainable architecture, to just keep on theme with this actual webinar itself, we can click on there and we can start to see all the different types of CPD material that are available that are linked to sustainable buildings. Great place to be if you are a supplier. There's always more specifiers and designers looking to take this CPD content, and it's a great relationship building tool. But ultimately, for yourselves as specifiers as well that will be listening, this has been increased weekly, so please keep checking back, and there's a lot more content there for you to actually do. And now it's obviously much more easy to access with the new CPD webpage. That leaves me one final thing to sort of demonstrate, and that's the specification side of things. So I'm not going to go into this too much. We do have a host of webinars that actually cover specification, but I'm just going to enter Chorus as a writer, and I'm in a project at the moment that I logged into earlier, which is just a demo for this particular case. It would be great to show you some actual projects that are going on, but obviously a lot of this has sensitive information. If you are a specifier, we can obviously assist you and look into what you're doing if you need any help there or any sort of guidance, and work with you on the actual project basis. But for this, all intents and purposes of this demo, I'm just going to show you some of the things that we've got. So preliminary, if we're setting out the actual contractual requirements at the beginning of the project, not getting into the specific specification of materials, but what project information you might need to do, the performance requirements, whether there's any site or groundwork requirements, we can filter, bring all of these in. We can filter by the different ones that we're looking for. And actually part those if we need to. So site context requirements, we can bring those in. Comfort performance, there's a whole host of different things. I'm just going to very quickly scroll down to the bottom, right down to things like air conditioning. There's environmental performance within there as well, vibration control, acoustic performance, right through to environmental performance. We are looking at improving these at the moment, and carbon metrics, etc., are going to be brought into there as well. I had a catch up recently with our technical authors, who are absolutely phenomenal individuals and do such a great job. And there's some of the things that they showed me that's in development that's going to be launching soon is going to be really, really helpful in terms of depicting what carbon metrics are going to be needed, what the minimum requirements have to be within projects and so forth. So specs are starting to be strengthened. Whilst if we look at the actual specification of materials then, so we get out, I've just got a demo here of a fit out spec. If we were going to go to add content, I don't know, let's say we were going to look for, I don't know, so let's stick with those carpet tiles. So file carpet tiles, let's look at this. Looking at the search button, and it actually brings in the references there. Now I want to specify a specific product. I can click add. Then if I go back into the content section, I've then got the clause. Now, this is what makes Chorus so efficient as a tool. It's very easy, very structured to do. But if you are a manufacturer that hosts on MBS source, ultimately your products get bought in straight away. So if we click on here, we can actually specify the manufacturer. So looking at those ones that we were checking out, I think Girflaw was one of them. You can see that all that data that we were looking at within the actual MBS source platform is now there within the specification tool. And as simple as clicking add to spec, it will add the product to the specification and automatically populate all of that data, which is based on that structured information. That's the specification. I think the final thing to go in terms of sustainable outcomes within the platform would be in collections. Now, when you're viewing products within MBS source, you can add these to what we call collections. You might refer to them as bundles and so forth. But in a bit of Blue Peter style, here's one I made earlier. I was looking at a landscaping project and I was pulling in different information, different products, materials that I thought, yeah, this might look great in this particular project that I'm working on. But one of the new functions that we have within the platform, and this is an MBS source, is the ability to download a sustainability report from those collections. So if I just click this, it's downloaded that and it's exported all of that information to a CSV file. We can open that. So we're now in that Excel. You can see all of those products that I had in that collection are now listed within here. We can scroll across, we can check all of the sustainability information that was listed against each. Some of these have EPD certificates, which we've then got the hyperlinks for there, but we can see the embodied carbon figures, what the declared units were, the recycled content, etc. Now, there's a whole host of different things that you could possibly do with this. You could add a few basic quantities in to calculate a rough idea of the overall embodied carbon within the project, whether it's, in this particular case, with paving slabs, it would be the actual paved area, or it could even be building envelopes. So whether you were designing a building, you might want to know what the brickwork, insulation, steel frame, whatever it is that you're doing overall would have as an impact. You can very quickly do this. There is more coming from a development point of view, so please bear with us. But I think some of the things that we've got up our sleeves coming for next year in particular are really going to help the users and strengthen the platform. So yeah, we've got you at the forefront in mind, and we're constantly continually improving to actually one, help the industry deliver sustainable outcomes, but ultimately help you as our customers to deliver sustainable outcomes as well. It doesn't just stop in terms of the product developments though as well. We really have a large focus on lowering our own impact operationally as a business, which ultimately will help you to lower yours as well. MBS and the whole of the Bexo UKI group, actually, including Glenigan and the Construction Information Service as well, are certified as carbon neutral to PAS 2060. Now, this isn't just a case of we've took some rough measurements and bought some mangrove plantation somewhere in far stretch corner of the world. We've actually gone through full UCAS audit and accredited certification schemes to actually get this done. Centre for Assessment were our provider on this. We've done it annually now since 2019, so we've been carbon neutral since that point. It's to PAS 2060. It includes the 3 UKI brands, and importantly, it's for full greenhouse gas inventory. So it's scope 1, 2, and 3. So scopes 1 and 2 being energy use and any company fleet that we may have, but scope 3 being the things that are beyond our control. So our own supply chain spends, business travel in terms of flights, hotel stays, use of the platforms, etc. It's a full inventory. So that means that as a supplier to yourselves, when you're using us, there's actually no impact from yourself there in terms of climate change, in terms of renewing it. We've managed to lower our emissions through switching to 100% renewable office energy probably by far the easiest thing that you can do as a business to do. But then looking at lowering the energy demand within the offices themselves, adopting web first approaches to meetings, and really sort of ramping up the travel booking processes, that making sure we're getting sign off procedures to ensure people aren't just booking travel here, there, and everywhere without it being monitored. But then also partnering with travel providers to actually look at selecting lower carbon flights, lower carbon hotel stays, and so forth there. And then on the nature side of things, as well as carbon offsets, which we have to do to offset the residual emissions, we've only offset carbon emissions through renewable energy projects. We won't go through plantation schemes or anything that can't be backed up. So we've supported international renewable energy schemes with the carbon offsets. They're all Vera certified, which you can go to the mbs.com and on the sustainability about us section, check those out. But aligning to the RIBA sustainable outcomes, we wanted to support the biodiversity gains as well in the areas that we operate. And to date, we've planted more than 10,000 native species trees in the UK, which are close to our offices. The most recent ones we've just planted were in Tyne Valley, near to the offices up in Newcastle upon Tyne. And this is really one to help, obviously, reforest areas and to lower those carbon emissions, but also to help the biodiversity to actually come back, butterflies, birds, so forth, into the areas that we work in. We want to improve the planet. We want to improve your sustainable outcomes as businesses, and by increasing our own sustainable outcomes, we think that's the way to do it. So we're helping you to reduce your own footprint, to lower supply chain emissions, whilst helping you to build more sustainably. And yeah, snowy theme there on this particular slide, which will bring me to a very quick wrap-up point in a minute. So construction, we're a key sector to tackle in achieving the country's net zero goals. Specifiers, you are increasingly demanding enhanced sustainability data. For any of the construction product manufacturers and suppliers listening, this is the case. We are getting asked these questions day to day. People are asking for data from manufacturers that may be missing, for example. So if you have one focus for next year in terms of your product marketing, look at ramping up those sustainability data sets that you may have. Embodied carbon and third-party certification such as EPDs, etc., for products specifically, but also for your actual business yourself. So ISO 14001 and so forth is an eye agenda item when people are assessing who to use. And then our products, MBS Source, enables you to provide clear and transparent data, which as a specifier then allows you to do your job more efficiently. And as a business, we will continue to develop those sustainability functions in the platforms. If we look back over the past 5 years from where we were to where we are now, some of the things that have been brought in are absolutely phenomenal. Our development team do a fantastic job, and I can only say that it's going to get stronger, better, and watch this space. So yeah, flicking back to that Christmas card, if you're going to do the right thing, please do. The planet needs to be lowered in temperature. We need to decarbonize our sector. And if all else fails, if it's not just for doing the right thing, nobody wants a Christmas card that looks like this. So yeah, at least do it to save Christmas. On that note, I'd like to say thank you very much. Hopefully you found this useful. Again, any questions, there's still a little bit of time to drop them in the Q&A, but I've been Lee Jones. I'd like to thank you very much for giving your time, and I will see you all soon. Thank you.